The day your husband leaves you after a cancer diagnosis is supposed to be the day your life falls apart. For Naomi Carter, it became the day her real life began. The golden light of a Manhattan sunset spilled across the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Whitmore penthouse, painting everything in warm shades of amber and gold. From 38 floors above the city, the world looked peaceful. Cars moved like tiny streams of light. The Hudson River shimmered beneath the fading sky. Everything appeared perfect. Naomi stood alone in the master bedroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror. At 34, she had the kind of quiet beauty that never demanded attention but somehow held it. Her deep brown skin glowed beneath the soft light. Her dark curls framed a face that carried kindness in every feature. She adjusted the sleeve of her cream-colored dress and forced a smile at herself. Tonight was supposed to be special. 8 years of marriage. 8 years of building a life together. 8 years of believing she had found the one person who would stand beside her through anything. Downstairs, candles flickered on the dining table she had spent hours preparing. Ethan loved details. The crystal glasses. The imported wine. The perfectly folded linen napkins. She wanted everything to be perfect when he came home. Her phone vibrated softly in her hand. The message from the hospital remained open. She had read it at least 20 times during the drive home. Even now, the words seemed impossible. Naomi closed her eyes and inhaled slowly. The doctor's voice echoed in her memory. Calm, professional, compassionate. The diagnosis had come early. Treatment options were strong. The prognosis was hopeful. But none of that mattered during the first moments after hearing the word cancer. The word itself seemed to erase every other sound in the room. For a few terrifying minutes, Naomi had felt as if the future she knew had simply vanished. Yet through all the fear, one thought had carried her home. Ethan. She imagined him wrapping his arms around her, telling her they would fight this together, reminding her she wasn't alone. That was what marriage meant, wasn't it? Standing together when life became difficult. She walked toward the nightstand and picked up a silver-framed photograph. The image showed 2 younger versions of themselves laughing on a beach in Martha's Vineyard during their honeymoon. Ethan's arm rested around her shoulders. Their smiles looked effortless, genuine, unbreakable. Naomi traced the edge of the frame with her fingertips. We'll get through this, she whispered softly. The sound of an elevator opening echoed from the hallway. Her heart immediately lifted. Ethan was home. She carefully placed the photograph back onto the table and straightened her shoulders. Fear still lived inside her chest, but hope stood beside it. Down the hallway came the familiar sound of expensive leather shoes against marble flooring. Slow, measured, confident. The footsteps of a man who had spent his entire life believing he could control every outcome. Naomi wiped away the trace of moisture gathering in her eyes and smiled. She wanted the first thing Ethan saw to be courage, not fear. The bedroom door opened. Ethan Whitmore stepped inside wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. At 39, he carried the polished confidence that had built a billion-dollar empire. But tonight something felt different. His expression seemed distant, tired, almost impatient. Naomi pushed aside the feeling immediately. She was probably imagining things. Ethan, she said softly, I need to tell you something. For a brief second, silence filled the room. Outside the windows, the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the skyline. The city lights began to awaken one by one below them. Neither of them knew it yet, but before this night ended, one marriage would die, one woman would lose everything she thought she needed, and the first chapter of a miracle neither of them could imagine would quietly begin. Naomi searched Ethan's face for the comfort she had rehearsed in her mind all afternoon, but the warmth she expected never came. Instead, he loosened his tie, glanced briefly at the candlelit dining room beyond the bedroom doorway, and exhaled as though carrying the weight of a difficult business. Meeting. What is it? He asked. Naomi tightened her grip around her phone. The city lights shimmered behind them like scattered diamonds across the darkness. I went to the doctor today, she said quietly. The biopsy results came back. For a moment, Ethan remained still. And Naomi swallowed. The word felt heavy enough to change the shape of the room. It is cancer. Silence settled between them. The candles downstairs continued to glow. The anniversary dinner remained untouched. Somewhere beyond the glass walls of the penthouse, A siren echoed faintly through Manhattan before disappearing into the night. Naomi waited. She waited for concern, for questions, for reassurance, for anything that resembled the man she had loved for 8 years. Instead, Ethan walked toward the window. His reflection appeared beside the skyline, sharp and distant. "How serious?" he finally asked. "The doctors found it early," Naomi replied quickly. "They are optimistic. Treatment starts next month. They believe the chances are very good." Ethan nodded once. Not with relief. Not with gratitude. Just calculation. Naomi felt something cold brush against her heart. "The doctors are hopeful," she continued. "They said many people recover completely." Ethan remained quiet. His hands slipped into his pockets. The same posture he used during negotiations worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The same posture he used when evaluating risks. Suddenly, Naomi no longer felt like his wife. She felt like a problem he was trying to solve. "Ethan," she whispered. He turned toward her slowly. "Do you know what treatment will involve?" Naomi blinked. "Chemotherapy. Follow-up procedures. Monitoring." "How long?" "Several months, maybe longer." He lowered his eyes briefly. "I see." The words landed harder than any expression of panic could have. Naomi stared at him. "That is all you have to say?" she asked softly. Ethan rubbed his forehead. "I am trying to process this." "So am I." Her voice trembled despite her efforts to steady it. "I was terrified driving home. But the entire time I kept telling myself that we would get through it together." Ethan looked away. That single movement hurt more than she expected. The room suddenly felt larger, colder. The distance between them seemed impossible to cross. Downstairs, the grandfather clock chimed 8 times. Each note echoed through the penthouse like a countdown neither of them understood. Naomi glanced toward the silver-framed honeymoon photograph resting on the nightstand. 2 smiling faces. 2 people who once believed love could survive anything. She wondered where those people had gone. Ethan finally spoke. "I have an important board meeting tomorrow." Naomi stared at him in disbelief. "A board meeting?" "There are things happening at the company right now that require my attention." She searched his eyes for compassion and found only exhaustion. Not because she was sick, because her illness had interrupted his plans. A painful realization settled inside her chest. The diagnosis had changed her future, but it had also revealed something she had never seen before. For the first time in 8 years, Naomi looked at her husband and felt completely alone. Outside, the last trace of sunset vanished beyond the horizon, and the darkness that filled the glass windows seemed to quietly enter the room with it. The following week passed like a slow-moving storm that neither of them acknowledged out loud. Naomi attended appointments, met specialists, reviewed treatment plans, and learned a new vocabulary she never wanted to know. Blood work, infusions, recovery timelines, survival rates. Every day she carried folders filled with medical information through the marble lobby of the building she still called home. Yet with each passing hour the penthouse felt less like a sanctuary and more like a waiting room for a future she could no longer recognize. Ethan became increasingly distant. He left earlier, returned later. Conversations shrank into practical exchanges about schedules and obligations. The man who once called her 3 times a day simply to hear her voice now barely looked up from his phone during dinner. Naomi kept telling herself he was scared. People handled fear differently. That explanation became her lifeline. She repeated it during sleepless nights. She repeated it while staring at the city lights beyond their bedroom window. She repeated it because the alternative hurt too much. Then one rainy Thursday afternoon, everything changed. Naomi returned home after meeting with her oncologist. The doctor had been encouraging. The treatment plan was promising. For the first time since her diagnosis, she had allowed herself a small measure of hope. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse. She stepped inside carrying a folder of paperwork and immediately sensed something was wrong. The living room looked unusually formal. 2 leather portfolios rested on the coffee table. Beside them sat a man in an expensive navy suit whom she recognized instantly. Ethan's attorney. Her heartbeat slowed. Not from calmness. From disbelief. Ethan stood near the fireplace with his hands clasped behind his back. His expression was unreadable. The rain tapped softly against the glass walls surrounding the room. For several seconds nobody spoke. Naomi looked from the attorney to Ethan and then back again. Deep inside, she already knew. She simply could not accept it. "What is this?" she asked quietly. Ethan avoided her eyes. Please sit down. Naomi remained standing. What is this? She repeated. The attorney shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Ethan finally exhaled. I do not think I can do this anymore. The words seemed to drain the air from the room. Naomi stared at him. Do what? His jaw tightened. This marriage. Silence followed. Heavy. Endless. The city skyline beyond the windows disappeared behind sheets of rain. Naomi felt as though the entire world had suddenly moved farther away. You are leaving me? She whispered. Ethan lowered his gaze. I believe it is the best solution for both of us. Naomi almost laughed at the absurdity of the sentence. Solution. As if 8 years together were a business problem waiting to be solved. As if love could be measured on a spreadsheet. I have cancer, she said. Her voice remained calm, which surprised even her. I know. I am about to begin treatment. I know. Naomi searched his face one final time for hesitation. For remorse. For some sign that this nightmare was not real. She found nothing except relief. And in that moment, something inside her quietly broke. Not her spirit. Not her strength. Only the illusion she had protected for years. Ethan Whitmore was not abandoning her because she was sick. He was abandoning her because adversity had revealed who he truly was. Outside, thunder rolled across the Manhattan sky. Inside, Naomi set her medical folder on the table and stood taller than she had all month. The diagnosis had frightened her. The betrayal awakened her. And although she did not know it yet, the woman who would eventually change thousands of lives was taking her first breath in that very moment. 3 weeks later, Naomi stood on a quiet sidewalk in Brooklyn holding a single suitcase and a cardboard box filled with the remains of a life she once believed was permanent. The October air carried the scent of rain and fallen leaves. Across the street, yellow taxi cabs rolled through the evening traffic while apartment windows glowed softly against the darkening sky. Behind her stood a modest brick building with aging steps and narrow hallways. It was nothing like the penthouse she had left behind. Yet for the first time in weeks, the silence around her felt honest. No lawyers. No negotiations. No carefully chosen corporate language disguising cruelty as practicality. Just truth. The divorce papers had been finalized with astonishing speed. Ethan's legal team handled everything efficiently. The same efficiency he applied to acquisitions, mergers, and boardroom decisions had now been applied to the end of their marriage. Naomi had signed the documents without argument. There was nothing left to defend. The marriage had already disappeared long before the paperwork arrived. Upstairs, apartment 4C waited for her. 600 square feet. 1 bedroom. A tiny kitchen. A narrow living room with a single window overlooking a row of maple trees. It was not glamorous. It was not impressive. But it was hers. Naomi carried the suitcase inside and slowly closed the door behind her. The quiet felt enormous. For several moments, she simply stood there. Her diagnosis. The divorce. The move. Everything had happened so quickly that her heart had barely managed to keep pace. On the kitchen counter sat a folder from the hospital. Treatment would begin in less than 2 weeks. The reality of it settled heavily over the room. She was alone. Truly alone. No husband waiting beside her. No familiar voice offering comfort. No one to drive her home after appointments. The weight of that realization finally broke through the wall of composure she had maintained for weeks. Naomi sat on the floor beside the unopened boxes and allowed herself to cry. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quiet tears falling onto folded cardboard as the city moved on outside her window. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Eventually the tears stopped. The room remained the same. The diagnosis remained the same. The betrayal remained the same. But something inside her had shifted. She looked around the empty apartment. At the worn hardwood floors. The plain white walls. The small stack of belongings that represented her entire future. Then her gaze settled on the hospital folder resting on the counter. Slowly, Naomi stood. She walked across the room and picked it up. The pages inside contained schedules, treatment plans, survival statistics, and appointments stretching months into the future. Fear whispered from every line. Yet hidden among the numbers was something else. Possibility. She remembered the doctor's words. Early detection. Strong prognosis. Excellent chance of recovery. For weeks, she had focused on what she might lose. For the first time, she considered what she might still have. Time. Opportunity. A future that remained unwritten. Outside the window, A street lamp flickered on as evening settled across Brooklyn. Its golden light spilled gently into the apartment. Naomi looked at her reflection in the glass. Tired, heartbroken, frightened, but still standing. She placed the folder carefully on the table and whispered words meant only for herself. Cancer may change my life, but it does not get to define it. The room offered no applause. No audience witnessed the moment. Yet that quiet promise carried more power than she understood. Because while Ethan believed he had walked away from a woman whose story was ending, Naomi was about to discover that she had only reached the first page of a completely different chapter. The first treatment session began on a cold November morning beneath gray skies that seemed to stretch endlessly above the city. Naomi sat beside a large hospital window wrapped in a soft blue blanket while nurses moved quietly through the treatment center. Around her were people from every walk of life. Teachers, veterans, mothers, college students, business owners. Some smiled bravely. Others stared silently at the floor. Yet despite their differences, they all carried the same invisible burden. Hope mixed with uncertainty. During those first weeks, Naomi learned that courage rarely looked the way movies portrayed it. Courage was not grand speeches or dramatic victories. Courage was showing up when fear begged you to stay home. Courage was answering another doctor's call. Courage was walking back into the treatment center after a difficult day and choosing to try again. The months that followed tested every part of her. There were mornings when exhaustion felt heavier than her own body. There were evenings when she sat alone in her apartment listening to the hum of traffic outside her window and wondering how much longer she could keep going. Yet each time doubt appeared, she remembered the promise she had made to herself on the night she moved into apartment 4C. Cancer would not define her life. Slowly, something unexpected began to happen. Naomi started noticing the struggles of the people around her. One elderly woman worried constantly about transportation costs. A young father missed treatments because he could not afford childcare. Another patient quietly admitted she was choosing between medication and rent. Their stories stayed with Naomi long after appointments ended. One afternoon, while waiting for blood work results, Naomi opened her notebook and began writing ideas. Small ideas at first. A volunteer ride program, meal deliveries, emergency assistance grants, resources that could make treatment slightly easier for families already carrying impossible burdens. She filled page after page. For the first time in months, she felt something stronger than fear. Purpose. Treatment continued. Seasons changed. Winter gave way to spring. The trees outside her apartment slowly returned to life. And little by little, Naomi did the same. Her doctors smiled more often during appointments. Test results improved. Recovery was no longer a distant possibility. It was becoming reality. One sunny afternoon nearly 18 months after her diagnosis, Naomi walked out of the hospital carrying a final treatment summary tucked beneath her arm. The air felt warmer than she remembered. The sky seemed brighter. She paused at the top of the hospital steps and closed her eyes as sunlight touched her face. Around her, strangers hurried through the city without realizing they had just passed a woman celebrating a miracle. Tears gathered in her eyes, but this time they came from gratitude rather than grief. Later that evening, she sat alone in her apartment reviewing the notebook she had started months earlier. The pages were filled with plans, budgets, research, contact information, dreams that had grown stronger during every challenge she survived. Naomi turned to a blank page and wrote 4 words across the top in careful handwriting. The Carter Hope Initiative. She stared at the name for several seconds. Then she smiled. The diagnosis that once threatened to end her future had introduced her to a purpose greater than herself. Outside her window, the city lights began appearing one by one against the fading sky. Naomi watched them quietly. Ethan had walked away believing her story was becoming smaller. He never imagined it was about to become bigger than either of them could possibly understand. 5 years passed with the quiet determination of seasons changing beyond a window. What had begun as a handwritten notebook on a small apartment table evolved into one of the fastest-growing patient support organizations in the country. The Carter Hope Initiative expanded from a handful of volunteers into a nationwide network serving thousands of families facing serious illness. Transportation assistance, emergency housing, treatment grants, counseling services. Every program carried the same message Naomi had once needed to hear herself. You are not alone. Her name gradually appeared in newspapers, medical journals, fundraising campaigns, and conference programs. Yet despite the recognition, she remained remarkably unchanged. She still answered emails personally whenever she could. She still visited treatment centers. She still sat beside frightened patients and listened to their stories. Success never became her identity. Service did. One bright September morning, Naomi stood inside the newly completed headquarters of the foundation. Sunlight poured through massive glass windows overlooking the East River. Staff members moved through the building preparing for the largest fundraising gala in the organization's history. The event would celebrate 5 years of impact and unveil a groundbreaking partnership supporting cancer research across the country. "You should be proud," said Grace Holloway, the foundation's executive director and Naomi's closest friend. "More than proud. What you built changed lives." Naomi smiled softly. "A lot of people built this." Grace laughed. "There you go again." Naomi glanced toward a framed photograph hanging near her office door. It showed a group of former patients gathered at a community event. Some had survived. Some were still fighting. Every face reminded her why the work mattered. "The truth is," Naomi said quietly, "those people saved me as much as I ever helped them." Later that afternoon, a garment bag arrived from a designer supporting the gala. Inside hung a breathtaking crimson evening gown. Elegant, timeless, powerful without demanding attention. Naomi ran her fingers lightly across the fabric. For a moment, she barely recognized the woman who would wear it. Not because she had become someone different, because she had finally become herself. Across Manhattan, Ethan Whitmore sat inside the corner office of Whitmore Global watching stock market reports scroll across multiple screens. At 44, he remained wealthy, respected, and influential. Yet the confidence that once seemed effortless had begun to show small fractures. Business remained successful, but life felt strangely hollow. Relationships came and went. Achievements arrived and quickly lost meaning. Some nights, he found himself staring across the city skyline with an unsettling sense that something important had been left behind years ago. That same evening, an assistant entered carrying a folder containing guest information for an upcoming charity gala. "You confirmed attendance last month," she reminded him. Ethan nodded absently while scanning the event summary. Then his eyes stopped. At the top of the page appeared a photograph. A familiar face. His heartbeat stalled. Naomi Carter, founder and keynote speaker. For several seconds the room seemed unnaturally quiet. The accompanying article described a cancer survivor whose foundation had transformed patient care across the nation. Ethan stared at the image. The confident smile. The calm eyes. The grace. She looked stronger than he had ever seen her. Slowly, he lowered the folder onto his desk. Outside his office windows, the city lights stretched endlessly into the distance. For the first time in years, a memory returned with perfect clarity. A rainy afternoon. A hospital folder. A woman standing tall despite heartbreak. And suddenly the gala no longer felt like another corporate obligation. It felt like destiny, quietly arranging a reunion neither of them could avoid. The Grand Regency ballroom glowed beneath crystal chandeliers that scattered light across polished marble floors and elegantly dressed guests. Leaders from the medical community, philanthropists, researchers, and business executives filled the vast room with conversation and anticipation. At the center of it all stood a stage framed by towering screens, displaying photographs of families whose lives had been touched by the Carter Hope Initiative. Ethan Whitmore entered through the main ballroom doors precisely at 7 o'clock. His tailored black tuxedo drew respectful nods from people who recognized his name, but tonight he barely noticed them. His attention remained fixed on the giant screen near the stage. A video presentation had begun. Images flashed one after another. Children ringing treatment completion bells. Parents embracing doctors. Volunteers delivering meals. Patients smiling through difficult journeys. Then Naomi appeared. The room erupted into applause. Ethan felt something tighten inside his chest. 5 years earlier, he had last seen her standing in a rain-soaked penthouse holding medical paperwork and heartbreak in equal measure. The woman on the screen looked entirely different. Not because success had changed her, because suffering had refined her. There was a quiet strength in her eyes now, a calm confidence that no amount of wealth could purchase. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. Tonight, we celebrate a woman whose courage transformed personal hardship into hope for thousands of families across America. Another wave of applause filled the ballroom. Ethan remained frozen in place. Around him, guests smiled warmly as they listened to stories of scholarships, treatment grants, and research initiatives funded through Naomi's organization. Every achievement seemed impossible when measured against the memory he carried. The memory of a woman he had once viewed as a burden during the most difficult chapter of her life. Suddenly, the lights dimmed. A spotlight appeared near the ballroom entrance. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. For a moment, even the music seemed to hold its breath. Naomi stepped into the room. She wore the crimson gown Grace had chosen for the evening. The rich color seemed to capture every beam of light surrounding her. Elegant without excess, powerful without effort. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needed validation from anyone. Guests rose from their seats almost immediately. Applause thundered through the ballroom. Some people cheered. Others wiped tears from their eyes. Ethan simply stared. The sound around him became distant. Naomi walked toward the stage, greeting volunteers, survivors, and supporters along the way. Every few feet, someone stopped her to offer thanks. Not admiration. Gratitude. The distinction struck Ethan harder than he expected. She had not built an empire for herself. She had built one for others. As Naomi reached the stage, the crowd remained standing. The ovation continued for nearly a full minute. Ethan looked around the ballroom. Doctors respected her. Researchers admired her. Families loved her. In a room filled with wealth and influence, she was unquestionably the most important person present. Then Naomi stepped behind the podium. Her eyes scanned the audience. Calm, steady, gracious. For one brief second, her gaze crossed the ballroom and met Ethan's. Time seemed to pause. No anger appeared in her expression. No bitterness. No resentment. Only peace. That simple absence of hatred shattered something inside him. Because for years he had quietly assumed that if they ever met again, she would despise him. Instead, she looked at him the way people look at a chapter they finished long ago. Important once. Irrelevant now. And as the audience settled into their seats to hear her speak, Ethan Whitmore experienced a realization more painful than any public humiliation. Naomi Carter had survived the illness. She had survived the betrayal. She had survived him. And somehow, in the process, she had become extraordinary. When the applause finally faded, Naomi stepped away from the podium surrounded by supporters, donors, and families eager to thank her personally. The ballroom buzzed with admiration, yet she carried herself with the same quiet grace that had guided her through every chapter of her journey. Across the room, Ethan remained seated long after everyone else had risen. He barely heard the conversations around him. Naomi's words echoed through his mind instead. She had spoken about resilience, about community, about finding light in the darkest moments. Not once had she mentioned betrayal. Not once had she spoken about the people who had abandoned her. Somehow that hurt more than if she had publicly condemned him. Later that evening, Ethan found himself standing alone beside an exhibit showcasing the foundation's history. Photographs lined an elegant display wall. Images from hospital visits, volunteer programs, research partnerships, children smiling, families embracing, lives transformed. One framed photograph caught his attention. Naomi sat beside a hospital bed, holding the hand of an elderly patient. The caption beneath it read, "No one should face illness alone." Ethan stared at the sentence. Alone. The word struck with uncomfortable precision. A voice beside him broke. The silence. She never stopped caring about people. Ethan turned to see Grace Holloway. "You work closely with her?" he asked. Grace studied him for a moment before nodding. For years. Ethan looked back at the photograph. She built all of this herself? Grace smiled softly. Not exactly. She inspired people to build it together. They stood quietly for several seconds. Then Grace added something unexpected. You know, during her treatment, there were days when she could barely stand. Yet she spent hours planning ways to help other patients. Ethan lowered his eyes. I did not know that. No, Grace replied. You probably did not. There was no anger in her voice. Only truth. Somehow that felt worse. Grace reached into a nearby display case and carefully removed a small folder prepared for major donors. She opened it and handed Ethan a page. Most people never hear this part of the story. Ethan accepted it. Inside was a copy of one of the foundation's earliest planning documents. At the bottom sat a handwritten note in Naomi's familiar script. The date stopped him cold. It had been written less than 3 months after the divorce. His eyes moved across the page. Then he saw the final sentence. Pain is not a reason to become bitter. It is a reason to become useful. Ethan read the line twice, then 3 times. His throat tightened. He remembered those same months very differently. He remembered focusing on quarterly reports, market expansions, corporate acquisitions. While he was protecting his comfort, Naomi had been transforming suffering into purpose. Grace quietly folded her hands. There is something else you should know. Ethan looked up. What? She never spoke badly about you. He blinked. What do you mean? Exactly what I said. Hundreds of people have asked about her past over the years. Journalists, donors, friends. She always refused to blame anyone. Ethan felt a wave of disbelief. After everything? Grace nodded. Her exact words were always the same. She paused. Everyone is fighting a battle we cannot see. I choose forgiveness. The ballroom suddenly felt too small. Ethan turned toward the stage where workers were beginning to clear. Decorations. 5 years. 5 years of carrying assumptions that Naomi must hate him. 5 years of convincing himself that time would eventually erase regret. Instead, every new truth revealed how profoundly he had misunderstood the woman he once called his wife. And standing there beneath the fading lights of the gala, Ethan finally understood something that success, wealth, and power had never taught him. The greatest loss of his life was not the marriage he ended. It was the extraordinary woman he failed to stand beside when she needed him most.